All right, come on, bring it back, bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. Hey, good morning. My name is Pastor Aaron. I'm excited to be teaching today. We're a little behind, so this is going to be interesting, but it's going to be fun. We're going to do it together. Hey, if you were with us last week, you remember Pastor Kevin Pike talking about his time on the ranch. I think it was like 3 days, down south. And when it was dinner time, they would hear this, right? And it was this, woo, come get it, time for dinner. And Kevin talked about how answering the call and being part of God's family is a lot like answering the dinner call, right? When he was on the ranch, hearing the dinner bell was this invitation. It was like, come on, it's time to gather around the table. It's time to be family because we're in this together and dinner is ready, right? It's this invitation to step in to who God is and who his family is and to be a part of something greater than we are a part of by ourselves. When we answer God's call, when we go on mission with God, we're not going on mission for God, we're going on mission with God. God first calls us to relationship, to being a part of his family, his tribe. And I love that quote by Kevin. When we are not called to go on mission for God, right? We are called to go on mission with God. Calling is first relational. It's this invitation to be a part of something, right? And I loved where Kevin talked about our spiritual gifts and who God's made us and how when we step into the faith family and into relationship with him, he supercharges who we are so that we can go on mission with him. So last week we took the spiritual gift inventory. If you weren't able to take that, it's available online. We have some in the back. And we'd love for you to ask yourself, man, as I've answered this call to be a part of God's family, what gifts has he given me? Who has he created me to be? Because he's inviting us into his family. He's inviting us into his mission to bring restoration and hope and healing to a broken world. So the calling is first an invitation, right? It's an invite. But second, it's an imperative. And that's what we're going to talk about this week. God does prepare us, like Kevin talked about last week, but he also places us. It is an invitation, but it is also imperative. I also have a dinner bell experience. I grew up on a farm. My grandpa's farm was a Welch's vineyard, and I spent a lot of time there in the summer, and I homeschooled, so basically that meant I was free labor all year round. And you know, come harvest time in the fall, we would spend a lot of time out in the grape vineyards, and you would hear this at noon, right? Time for lunch, that invitation. You'd hear this at 6, time for dinner, that invitation. But if you ever heard this at another time of the day, and it didn't stop, and it kept going, it meant there was an imperative, right? It might be your house, it might be your neighbor's house, but before texting and cell phones and all these things, this was how we in Lawton, Michigan would tell our neighbors we needed help. And so one time when my grandma was a little girl, they heard that noise, and there was a fire, right? Another time, someone had had a heart attack. And so answering that call, when we're a part of God's family, it's an invitation, but sometimes it's also an imperative. And God has placed us in situations that he has uniquely prepared us for to bring his kingdom. And so what we want to talk about today is, God's prepared you. A lot of us have answered that call about being a part of his family. But what has he placed you in this world to do? How has he uniquely equipped you for the situations that you're going to face to bring the kingdom of Jesus into a broken world, to bring his hope, his healing, his restoration? That's that's the million-dollar question, right? What is the purpose of my life? A few years ago, when I was brand new to being a pastor and trying to figure all this stuff out, I had a young family from one of our churches over at Ridgepoint get a hold of me and say, "Hey, we just want to let's grab breakfast. We have some questions. We're trying to figure out what to do with our lives. We're in our mid-30s and we don't know what we're going to do when we grow up." And so I went to Rock Island. It's no longer there. Rest in peace. But went to Rock Island for breakfast. Grabbed breakfast with this young couple, and they started talking to me. We're going to talk about their purpose and what God's calling them to. And they started immediately talking about their jobs. And this light bulb went off for me, and I think maybe for a lot of us, but especially for our millennial generation and younger, we are wired for justice. We want to bring wholeness. We want to see our purpose, and in life, we want everything to have a meaning. And as I was talking to these folks, they started talking about their careers. And I was like, okay, so for you, it's synonymous that your job lines up with your calling, right? And I think that might be something that a lot of us are feeling today. And so as I talked to them, I started talking about the career ladder, right? This is our career ladder. See what I did there? It's a ladder. And what I heard from her was that she had a job that she was capable of, but it's kind of a neutral thing. Like she went to work, she did a good job, she left it at work, didn't give her energy, didn't fulfill her purpose. It was just kind of what it was. I mean, she cleaned houses. She didn't see another human all day long. And so she felt like her purpose or her calling in life wasn't being fulfilled through this job. And she felt like if she could climb that ladder somehow with her job, she would figure out what she was called to do. She was looking for that top rung thing. And I started talking to him, and he, his job wasn't kind of neutral. His was positive. He did something that he was very competent in. It gave him energy. He liked what he did, what he was called to do. I think a lot of us, when we think about calling, we think our careers are synonymous with that. And what I kind of want to say today is that's not biblical, right? Calling isn't what you do. It's first who you do it with, like we talked about last week. And it's second, how you do it, all right? And we're going to look at a text today. We're going to look at a story that kind of reinforces this idea about it doesn't really matter what you do for your job. Calling doesn't come through what you do, but how you do it. Sometimes some of us are going to be called to take a different road to find our calling. But most often, God has already prepared us and already placed us on the road that we need to be on in order to live out our calling, right? We don't need to change the road that we're on. We need to change the road as we travel on it. We need to move through this life in a way that brings God's kingdom to whatever relationships, whatever situations that we find ourselves a part of. So today, we're going to meet a young lady named Esther. Now, Esther is a book of the Old Testament. If you've never read it, man, you should read it. I read the whole thing this week, and this could be like a 6-week series, and I literally have 20 more minutes, okay? So, read the book of Esther, but here's the synopsis. Esther is a young lady who lives about 500 BC, and the Israelites have been in exile for 70 years, and it's this time in history where some of the Israelites are going back to Jerusalem, and they're coming home, but some of the Israelites are still in other countries. And Esther finds herself in Persia under King Xerxes. And Xerxes is a jerkses, okay? He's not a cool guy. And you should just read the story. I'm telling you, he's the kind of guy where when his wife disappointed him, and there's a lot of variables. If you know the story, we can't get into it all. But his wife disappoints him, and he decides to exile her basically. And he holds this beauty contest for all the ladies in his kingdom, and he's adding new women to his harem basically. And now if you grow up as a child hearing the story, you're like, there's a beauty contest and Esther won. No, Esther's being trafficked, okay? Esther is in a situation where she is taken away from her uncle Mordecai. She was already an orphan. Her parents had died. Not a bed of roses that Esther grew up on, right? And now her uncle had adopted her. And now she is forced into this beauty pageant because she's physically beautiful. And she finds that she wins it. Yay! She's added to the harem, all right? So when we meet Esther, in her time and place in history, there's just so much brokenness. The king is allowed to own anything and anyone in his kingdom. She is not living this top-rung life where her career is making her everything make sense and giving her a sense of purpose and fulfilling. But what we learn about Esther is that no matter what situation that she is in, she excels, right? She's put in this harem, and immediately she wins the favor of the people in charge of her. We get this idea that she starts to bring the wholeness of God wherever she goes. And instead of trying to get out of some situation, like for her, her situation was cruddy. All right, I had to find another C word. Okay? Her situation was cruddy. But instead of trying to get off the road, because she couldn't, she'd get killed, she determined in her heart to bring the kingdom into the situation. So she's constantly, throughout the whole book of Esther, going to Mordecai and asking for coaching. How do I navigate the situation? How do I stay alive? And what we see as the story unfolds is that she starts to bring the kingdom into every situation she's a part of. And this is because Esther is present in her own story, right? She's not waiting for some future time to live out her calling. She's not looking for a new reality. She's not trying to get out of the brokenness. She's on her road. And she's present in her own story. And her only option is to write her life story in such a way that it honors God. And I think for a lot of us, we want to escape our cruddy situations. We want to find stuff we're competent at. And we want to get to a lifestyle that feels like it's comfortable. Then we feel like we're doing our calling. And comfort is not synonymous with calling, right? Esther doesn't get to be comfortable. She's literally in a human trafficking situation, but she is present in her own story. And because she's present in her own story, a situation arises where her uncle Mordecai, he's kind of promoted into a position of authority in one of the provinces of Persia, and he hears about this scheme that Haman, one of the king's advisors, who's really, if Xerxes is Xerxes, Haman, I gotta find a word that rhymes with Haman. He's a shame, man. He is not good. All right, he is just, he's selfish and he's self-centered, and he decides he hates Mordecai so much because Mordecai won't bow down to him, that he tricks the king into making a law that cannot be changed. The laws of the Medes and the Persians cannot be changed. He tricks him into making a law that makes it okay on one day for everybody just to slaughter all the Israelites, right? He makes a genocide law. He tricks the king. Now, at this point in the story, the king doesn't know that his queen that he's promoted out of his harem and into his household as his queen is actually one of the Israelites. There's a lot of details there. But Esther finds herself in this position of influence because she's present in her own story where she has a choice to make. Am I going to stand up to the king and save my people, or am I going to keep my mouth shut and protect my own life? Right? She comes to a point of calling. She comes to a point, she's been prepared, she's been placed, and now there's a situation right in front of her that she's the only person that can do something about this, to spoil Haman's plot, to protect her people from genocide. And she's got to decide, what am I going to do in this situation? Because it would be easier for her to lean back and be comfortable and safe than it would for her to step forward and fulfill her purpose and answer her calling. So I get this idea that she's wrestling back and forth. She has a choice. And this is what it says in Esther chapter 4. And this is Mordecai, her uncle, coaching her a little bit. And he says this: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." You have been placed in this moment for this reason, and you are the uniquely qualified to partner with God in this moment. Right? There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's important for us to remember God doesn't actually need us, right? Mordecai says that. Like, if you don't do it, somebody else will. He's going to have his way. But God delights in partnering with his people to bring wholeness to broken situations, right? And it's leaving our own situation and finding something else, but it's just leaning into the broken road that we're on and bringing wholeness. Oh, we should have cued that song behind me. But Esther has a hard decision to make, right? She's in her 20s. If she walks in and asks the king a question without being summoned, she could be killed. He's in his inner court. He's been there for days. No one's allowed to approach him without being called. what is she going to do, right? And we see that Esther actively pursues God's kingdom in her areas of influence. First, she's present on her own story. Second, she pursues God's kingdom. Now, it's easy to look at this genocide situation and be like, oh man, that's why she's awesome. But we get the idea through the whole book that this isn't a one-time gig. Every day in the mundane situations of life, Esther is living this way. She's stretching these muscles of answering the call, of partnering with God, of bringing wholeness into broken situations, of being a light in the harem, one of the darkest places in all of human society, right? Forced prostitution. She pursues God's kingdom. She is the kind of person who has been practicing and is ready to answer this call. And ultimately she does. We see in Esther 4, verse 15, this is what happened. Then Esther sent a reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Pray for me, intercede for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And my attendees will fast as you do. It's interesting too. This is just a side comment. Her attendees, who aren't Jews probably, are fasting and praying to her God. Like, that's a testimony of how she lives her life. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. She is nuts, right? It's a significant, when the Bible was put together in cultures where women were seen as property, that the people of God were given a story of a woman of God who is standing up against oppression, who is partnering with Yahweh through power and purpose to bring wholeness and hope to the world, right? This is one of the original girl power stories of humanity. She is unafraid. And it says something about God that he would partner with anyone, with her like this. He is a God that loves to use his children to bring wholeness. And she says, you know what? Even though it may cost me my life, I'm going to do what needs to be done. I'm going to answer the call. And in this action, we see that Esther gives God's calling priority over her own comfort. Her calling, what she's called to, isn't this top-rung, comfortable, paid-to-do ministry experience. All right? Her calling is literally the worst possible thing that someone could imagine. Right? It's to step in before the most powerful man in her region and question his decision. And we see in Esther that she puts priority over God's calling. Priority on God's calling over her comfort. And you should just read the rest of the book. I'm not going to tell you what happens. Isn't that horrible? Cliffhanger. What happens, though, is that when she partners with God, he uniquely and powerfully uses how he's naturally made her to bring about a preferred course in history. The only miracle in this story is that God works with Esther. There's no parting of the Red Sea. There's no multiplying wine. It just shows us a picture of a God that works through his people to bring his kingdom. And it begs the question for every one of us, how have I been uniquely prepared and placed to answer God's call on my life? Because every one of us has been prepared, right? In the book of Matthew, in chapter 5, it says this: you are a light of the world. This is Jesus talking. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it on under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand. They put the light up, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven. Friends, I simply want to ask you today how you've been created to spread light, right? A city on a hill, in that time and place in history, there wasn't electricity. I didn't have a flashlight. But at night, I could see a city on the hill for miles. And if I was in distress, I would go to the city because that's where people were. That's where safety was. Are we a local church? Am I a person that is spreading the light and life of Jesus on the road that he's placed me on? Here's some questions for us to reflect on from Esther's story. How do I need to be present in my own story? And quit running from the things that make me uncomfortable. But what unique situation has God put me in, like he put Esther in, that I'm uniquely prepared and placed to bring his kingdom? And I can't answer that question for you. Let the Holy Spirit answer that question for you this week. How do you need to be present in your own story? Am I actively pursuing God's kingdom in my area of influence? I don't have a genocide to fight, okay? But every day, I've got a family, I've got coworkers, I've got a community, I've got friends who are all experiencing the brokenness of this world. All right? And it might not be what you get paid to do. For most Christians, it's not. But how are you being present in those situations in a way that you can pursue God's wholeness? I think when something is uncomfortable or broken, we lean back to comfort. And that's not what we do as the followers of Jesus. We lean forward and we pursue the kingdom in every situation. Is it your job? Is it your neighborhood? Is it your family? But what would God prioritize in your situation? Where does he want to partner with you to pursue his kingdom? And then do I give God's calling in my life priority over my comfort? Ew. That's a hard one for all of us, right? Am I letting God's priorities be more important than mine? Comfort for me, and I think for most Americans, is an idol. We pursue comfort and entertainment above almost anything else. And as people of Jesus, as followers of Yahweh, the God of Scripture, that's not where we're supposed to find our fulfillment. That's not what we're supposed to spend 3 or 4 hours a night on Netflix doing, right? We are uniquely designed to be present in our own stories, to pursue God's kingdom, and to prioritize his kingdom over our own. And so today, I can't answer those questions for you, but I just encourage you to ask them. And see what the Lord does. See what he calls you to in the coming weeks and months, where he calls you, like Esther, to journey with him in every little situation to bring the hope and the wholeness of the kingdom of God. Last week, we did these spiritual gift inventories. And if you would like one of those, they're on the back table. You can take one as you go. But this week, we're going to grab the cards that are under your chair. And we're going to kind of wrap up in the next few minutes by asking you to answer the questions, who has God created me to be, right? That top list is your spiritual gifts. What spiritual gifts has God given you? And how are you supposed to use them? And then the rest of that, you are created to do certain things for the mission of God like Esther was. And we want to equip you and prepare you to do that. But some of you are also created to do that with us here as the mission of the church, right? And this is an invitation as you fill this out, as you check out these boxes of the things that you're uniquely prepared for and placed for. If you drop these in those gray buckets in the back, we're going to get a hold of you, okay? Heads up, warning. And we're going to say, hey, if God's created you to be artistic, how about joining our local church and doing that for the community mission? If God has created you to be a good writer, how about joining our local church's mission and helping us do that together? Every week, dozens of people do setup and tear down and music and children's ministry and all these things to take their individual calling and add it to this collective, to be a part of this mission together. And so over the next couple of minutes, I just encourage you, fill this thing out. And if you want to throw in with us, if you want to help the mission of the church of following Jesus and making him known fearlessly to our local communities happen, we'd love some help. We have a dedicated group of volunteers. You guys are fantastic. We probably have half as many people as we need to do all the programs that we do, right? So we'd love for you to figure out where you fit in that mission. So take a minute to fill those cards out. I'll stop talking and then I'll be back.